The late September sun hung mercilessly over Prospect Ridge, turning the auction square into a bowl of dust and misery. Through the haze, pregnant widow Sarah Mackenzie pressed a protective hand to her 7-month belly as she pushed through the crowd. The weight of her late husband's wedding ring seemed to burn in her palm, her last valuable possession in this world. "Step right up, good citizens," bellowed Marcus Crowley, the Sierra Dominion Mining Company's auctioneer, his voice carrying over the restless murmur. "Today's offerings include prime labor contracts for your mines, mills, and homesteads." Sarah's green eyes swept across the square until they found what she'd come for, the iron cage at the platform's edge. Inside, a man knelt in the dirt, his broad shoulders bearing old scars that spoke of past violence. His long black hair, streaked with premature gray, hung like a curtain around his weathered face. This was Samuel Blackwater, the half-Shoshone hunter whose name had once meant something in these mountains. Pressed against Samuel's side was a boy of perhaps 6 years, thin as a sapling and silent as stone. Young Thomas clung to his father with desperate fingers, his dark eyes holding a 1,000-yard stare that belonged on no child's face. "Next up," Crowley announced with theatrical flourish, "we have ourselves a genuine mountain savage and his whelp Samuel Blackwater caught poaching on company land." The lie rolled off his tongue smooth as molasses. "Strong back, knows these mountains like the devil knows sin. Perfect for your dangerous work. The boy comes free, might make a decent stable hand if you can get him to speak." The crowd laughed, ugly and harsh. Sarah noticed her brother-in-law, William Mackenzie, standing near the platform's base. His expensive suit and gold watch chain marked him as a man of means, everything his younger brother James hadn't been. William's pale eyes found hers across the square, and his thin lips curved in what might have been satisfaction. "Shall we start the bidding at $20? "25, shouted a mine foreman. 30, called another. Sarah's fingers tightened on the ring. She'd come here with purpose, knowing what the town whispers said, that William had somehow engineered this auction, that the Blackwater family held secrets about the disputed lands, that her late husband's death in that convenient mining accident had cleared the way for William to claim everything. $40. William's voice cut through the noise. He wasn't looking at Samuel, but at Sarah. His message, clear asterisk, "See how I control everything in this town, even your attempt at justice, asterisk." The bidding stalled. $40 was steep for damaged goods, even with a free child thrown in. Crowley prepared to bring down his hammer. Sarah stepped forward. "I'll pay with this." She raised the gold wedding band high enough for all to see. The square fell silent except for the whistle of wind through the ramshackle buildings. The ring caught the harsh sunlight, sending small rainbows dancing across the dusty ground. "Ma'am," Crowley stammered, "this is a cash auction." "That ring's worth $60 at least," Sarah said, her voice carrying the steel she'd found since James's death. "Unless the Sierra Dominion Company doesn't recognize the value of gold anymore." Whispers rippled through the crowd. A pregnant widow trading her wedding ring for a broken Indian and his boy. The scandal would feed the gossips for months. William's face darkened. "That ring is Mackenzie family property," he said loudly. "My poor brother's widow clearly isn't thinking straight in her condition." It was a gift freely given in marriage. Sarah countered, "Making it mine to dispense with as I choose. Or would you like to challenge that in front of all these witnesses? William." She saw him calculate the public scene, the potential questions about property rights, the attention it might draw to other matters he'd prefer kept quiet. His jaw worked like he was chewing bitter root. "Sold!" Crowley banged his hammer quickly, eager to move past this uncomfortable moment. "To the widow Mackenzie." Sarah walked to the cage with as much dignity as her condition allowed. The crowd parted, some with pity, others with scorn. She could hear Reverend Josiah Crane's voice rising somewhere behind her. "The corruption of decent Christian women continues first. They forget their place, then they consort with heathens." At the cage, She met Samuel's eyes for the first time. They were deep brown, almost black, holding pain and pride in equal measure. He didn't look grateful, if anything. He seemed to be measuring her, trying to understand what new torment this represented. "The key," Sarah said to the guard. "Ma'am, are you sure?" "The key." With reluctant movements, the guard unlocked the cage. Samuel didn't move immediately. It was young Thomas who stirred first, tugging at his father's torn shirt. The boy's mouth opened and closed like he was trying to speak, but no sound emerged. Samuel rose slowly, unfolding to his full height, taller than Sarah had expected, despite his time in captivity. He stepped out of the cage with careful dignity, then reached back for Thomas. The boy scrambled into his father's arms, hiding his face against the familiar shoulder. "My cabin is at Boulder Creek, 3 miles north," Sarah said quietly. "Anyone who chooses to come is welcome to shelter and food." She turned and walked away, not looking back. Behind her, she heard William's voice rising in anger. The reverends continued sermonizing, the crowd's mixed reactions. But she also heard something else, the soft footfall of moccasined feet following at a careful distance. The walk out of town felt eternal. Her back ached. The baby kicked restlessly, and the sun seemed determined to boil the earth. But Sarah kept her chin high, even when she heard the whispers from doorways and windows. Lost her mind with grief. "That baby'll be born cursed now. Mackenzie's turning in his grave." Let them talk. They didn't know about the worn journal hidden beneath her cabin's floorboards, filled with James's suspicions about his brother. They didn't know about the unsigned will he'd mentioned in his last letter, or about his friendship with Samuel Blackwater, the man who'd saved his life in a blizzard 2 winters ago. The cabin came into view as the sun touched the mountain peaks. Modest but sturdy, built with James's own hands, Sarah paused at the door, finally allowing herself to look back. Samuel stood at the edge of the clearing, Thomas still in his arms. The man's face was unreadable in the failing light. "The door's open," Sarah said simply. Inside, she lit a candle and placed it in the window, an old signal James had used to show he was home. Her hands shook slightly as she worked. The ring was gone. The last physical connection to her husband traded away. But somehow, it felt like the first right thing she'd done since his death. She heard Samuel enter, his steps careful on the wooden floor. He set Thomas down gently, and the boy immediately went to the corner farthest from the door, curling into himself like a wounded animal. Samuel himself remained near the entrance, ready to flee if this proved to be another trap. "There's stew on the stove," Sarah said without turning. "Blankets in the chest. The lean-to out back has tools if you've a mind to repair it for shelter." "Why?" The word came out rough, like he hadn't used his voice in days. Sarah finally faced him. "Because my husband spoke of you with respect. Because what they're doing to your people is wrong. Because—" She touched her belly. "Because I want my child born into a world where kindness isn't considered madness." Samuel studied her for a long moment. Then he moved to the stove, ladling stew into 2 bowls, one for Thomas, one for himself. He paused before eating, and she saw his lips move in what might have been a prayer of thanks in his mother tongue. As darkness settled fully over Boulder Creek, Sarah noticed a tiny change. Thomas had uncurled slightly and was watching her with those 2 old eyes. When she smiled at him, he didn't smile back, but he did pull something from his pocket. A small blue stone, smooth from handling. He placed it carefully on the windowsill beside her candle. It wasn't trust, not yet, but it was a beginning. Outside, unknown to the cabin's occupants, a figure with expensive field glasses watched from the ridgeline. William Mackenzie lowered the instrument and smiled coldly. Let his fool sister-in-law play house with her strays. Soon enough, he'd have the legal documents to declare her unfit, claim guardianship of James's unborn child, and with it, all the lands and rights that should have been his from the start. After all, Reverend Crane was already prepared to testify about her moral degradation. The town doctor could be persuaded to find signs of hysteria brought on by pregnancy and accidents. Well, accidents happened in the mountains all the time. James had learned that lesson well enough. William mounted his horse and rode back toward town, already composing tomorrow's moves in the chess game that Prospect Ridge had become. He never noticed the raven watching from a dead pine, or the way it took wing toward the deeper mountains, carrying news to those who still remembered the old agreements about the sacred valley hidden among the peaks. The candle in Sarah Mackenzie's window burned on through the night, a small defiance against the darkness gathering around Boulder Creek. Inside, 3 broken people began the careful work of learning to exist in the same space, not yet a family, but no longer alone. The ending that would shake Prospect Ridge had begun with a widow's desperate gamble, a wedding ring, and a cage that could no longer hold what needed to be free. The morning mist clung to Boulder Creek like a shroud as Sarah struggled with the water bucket. At 7 months pregnant, even simple tasks had become monumental. Her back screamed protest as she straightened, only to find the bucket lifted from her hands. Samuel stood beside her, his movements so quiet she hadn't heard his approach. Without a word, he carried the water to the cabin, then returned for the second bucket she'd planned to fill. It had been 3 days since the auction, and this was how they communicated, through actions rather than words. Thomas sat on the porch, arranging small stones in patterns only he understood. The boy still hadn't spoken, but Sarah noticed he'd begun following her with his eyes, especially when she hummed while cooking. Sometimes his lips moved like he was trying to remember how words worked. "The roof needs mending before the winter rains," Samuel said suddenly, his voice still rough from disuse. He stood at the corner of the cabin, examining the weathered shingles. "I'll need tools." "There's a ladder in the lean-to," Sarah replied, grateful for the practical conversation. "James kept his tools there too. You're welcome to whatever you need." She watched him work throughout the morning, efficient and methodical. Thomas helped by handing up shingles, the two working in a synchronized rhythm that spoke of long practice. Sarah found herself studying them the way Samuel's hands stayed gentle even when handling rough materials, how Thomas anticipated his father's needs without being asked. The peace shattered when hoofbeats announced visitors. Martha Donnelly, who ran the general store with her husband, dismounted with difficulty. Behind her rode 2 other women from town, their faces mixing curiosity with disapproval. Sarah's heart sank even as she forced a welcoming smile. "Sarah, dear," Martha began, her voice dripping false concern. "We've come to see how you're managing." The women's eyes tracked immediately to Samuel on the roof, then to Thomas, who'd retreated behind a barrel at the sight of strangers. Sarah saw judgment crystallizing in their expressions. "I'm managing quite well, thank you," Sarah said evenly. "Would you like some tea?" "We couldn't possibly impose. One of the other women misses." "Garrett," the banker's wife said with a sniff. "We've only come to deliver some news, and perhaps some Christian counsel." Martha leaned in conspiratorially. "The whole town's talking. Sarah, Reverend Crane gave a sermon about the corruption of widows. He didn't name names, but everyone knew. And your brother-in-law?" "William's telling everyone you've lost your senses with grief." "Mrs. Garrett interrupted. "That you need guidance. He's speaking with Judge Patterson about having you declared incompetent." Sarah's hands clenched in her apron. "Is that so?" "He only wants what's best for James's baby," Martha added quickly. "A child needs proper Christian upbringing, not, well..." She glanced meaningfully at Samuel. "What exactly are you implying, Martha?" The woman flushed. "Just that it doesn't look right. A pregnant widow living with a savage and his boy. People will talk." "People are already talking," Sarah said coldly. "Yet I noticed none of them offered help when I was struggling alone. Where was Christian charity when I was hauling water and chopping wood with this belly?" "That's different." "Is it?" Sarah stepped forward, her calm mask cracking. James trusted that man up there, spoke of him with respect, but because his skin is darker and his mother was Shoshone, you'd have me turn him out.
Mrs. Garrett gasped. Sarah Mackenzie, what would your husband think?
My husband would think I was honoring a debt, Sarah interrupted. Mister, Blackwater saved James's life 2 winters ago. Did you know that when James was caught in that blizzard near Devil's Pass, it was Samuel who found him, who got him to shelter? But James couldn't tell that story, could he? Because good Christian folks like you wouldn't want to hear about owing anything to an Indian. The women exchanged uncomfortable glances. From the roof. Sarah heard the hammering stop. Martha tried one more time.
Sarah, please, think of your reputation. Think of the baby.
I am thinking of my baby, Sarah said quietly. I'm thinking I want this child born into a world where kindness matters more than color, where helping someone in need doesn't require checking their pedigree first. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have lunch to prepare. The women left in a flutter of offended dignity. Sarah stood watching their dust until a small hand tugged at her skirt. Thomas had emerged from his hiding spot, offering her another of his blue stones. This one had a vein of white running through it like a tiny river.
Thank you,
she whispered, blinking back tears she refused to shed. That evening, after a silent supper of cornbread and beans, Sarah noticed the loose floorboard near the fireplace. She'd been meaning to fix it for weeks. Kneeling awkwardly, she pried it up and froze. Beneath lay an oilcloth bundle she'd never seen before. With trembling hands, she unwrapped it, revealing a leather journal, a folded map, and an old Colt revolver. The journal was in James's handwriting. My dearest Sarah, the first entry began. If you're reading this, then my suspicions about William have proved founded. I pray I'm wrong, but a man must prepare for the worst. She read by candlelight while Samuel banked the fire and Thomas curled in his corner with the blanket she'd given him. The journal told a story of sabotage at the mine, of William's meetings with Sierra Dominion executives, of threats both subtle and direct. But it was the entry about Raven's Nest that made her gasp. The Sacred Valley exists. James had written, Samuel showed me after I saved his cousin from a cave-in. The gold there could make a man rich beyond dreaming. But the Shoshone have an agreement: take only what you need. Never wound the mountain's heart. William knows something's there. He's been pressing, threatening. I've drawn up papers with a lawyer in Sacramento. Benjamin Hartley, if something happens to me, find him. Trust Samuel. He knows the old ways and the new laws both. The baby you carry has rights William can't steal if you're clever about it. Sarah looked up to find Samuel watching her from across the room. You knew James had this hidden. He nodded slowly. He asked me to watch, to wait, said you'd find it when ready. And Raven's Nest. Samuel's face went carefully blank. Sacred ground, hidden, safe for now. Before Sarah could ask more, Thomas made a sound, not quite a word, but intentional. He was pointing at the window. Through the glass, Sarah saw lights moving on the hillside. Torches. They're watching, Samuel said unnecessarily. Sarah tucked the journal inside her bodice and checked the Colt. It was loaded. Let them watch. Tomorrow I'm riding to town to wire Mr. Hartley in Sacramento. Dangerous, Samuel observed. Everything's dangerous now, Sarah replied. But I'm done being afraid. That night, she heard Thomas whimper in his sleep. Before she could rise, Samuel was there, gathering the boy against his chest and humming something low and wordless. It was the first truly tender thing she'd seen from him, this glimpse of the father beneath the guarded exterior. His mother? She asked softly. Gone. The sickness. 3 winters back. Samuel's voice was barely audible. He spoke until the day she died. Haven't heard his voice since. Sarah moved without thinking, placing her hand over Samuel's where it rested on Thomas's hair. He went still but didn't pull away. He'll speak again, she said with quiet certainty.
When he's ready. When he feels safe.
Samuel studied her in the dim light. Why do you care?
Because every child deserves to be heard.
Sarah said simply.
Because your son reminds me that terrible things happen to innocents, and someone should stand against that, because...
She hesitated, then forged ahead. Because I'm tired of being alone in this fight.
A sound escaped Thomas, still not a word, but closer.
His small hand reached out to touch Sarah's belly, where the baby kicked as if in response.
See?
Sarah smiled through tears.
They're already talking to each other.
Samuel's weathered face softened almost imperceptibly. Your husband was a good man. Rare. For a white, he understood about keeping balance.
Tell me about Raven's Nest,
Sarah urged quietly. But Samuel shook his head. When the time comes, first, we survive what's hunting us now. The candle burned low as the unlikely trio sat in their strange vigil, a pregnant widow, a broken warrior, and a silent child, bound together by circumstance and the growing recognition that they might be each other's only hope. Outside, the watchers on the hill extinguished their torches one by one, but Sarah knew they'd be back. William wouldn't give up easily, and Reverend Crane would keep preaching his poison. The town would keep gossiping. But here in this cabin, something was taking root. Not trust, not yet, but possibility. And for tonight, possibility was enough, as sleep finally claimed them. The raven that had watched William Mackenzie 3 nights ago settled on the roof Samuel had repaired. It cocked its head at the candle still glowing in the window, then spread its wings and flew west toward the hidden valley, carrying news that the widow was stronger than expected, and the warrior was remembering how to protect what mattered. The real test would come soon enough. The courthouse steps were crowded with townspeople when Sarah arrived, her chin high despite the whispers that followed her like smoke. William Mackenzie stood at the top, flanked by Reverend Josiah Crane and Dr. Elias Winters. The trap was perfectly laid, a public declaration of her supposed instability. There she is, William announced loudly.
My poor sister-in-law, so overcome with grief she's forgotten all propriety.
Sarah climbed steadily, one hand protecting her belly, behind her. She sensed Samuel's presence. He'd refused to let her come alone, though they'd agreed he'd stay back to avoid provocation. Thomas waited with old Henry Pike at the general store, the retired miner, one of the few who'd shown them kindness. I've asked Judge Patterson to review your situation. Sarah, William continued, his voice carrying theatrical concern. Doctor, Winters has agreed to examine you, to document your condition. My pregnancy, Sarah asked dryly.
I assure you, William, I'm quite aware of it without medical documentation.
Nervous laughter rippled through the crowd, quickly stifled by Reverend Crane's stern glare. Your mental state, woman, the Reverend interjected. No Christian widow in her right mind would take up with heathens. It speaks to a corruption of the spirit, a weakness that endangers the innocent child you carry. Sarah reached the top step, facing the 3 men squarely.
And what qualifies you to judge my spirit? Reverend, when did Christ say, help only those who look like you? I must have missed that sermon.
The Reverend's face darkened. Do not blaspheme. Woman, your husband.
My husband, Sarah interrupted clearly, wrote extensively about you, Reverend Crane, about your missions to the Shoshone camps, about the fires, about your particular interest in erasing their claim to certain valleys.
A hush fell over the crowd. The Reverend's face went from red to pale. Lies, he sputtered. The ravings of a woman who... Sarah pulled out James's journal, holding it high.
My husband's own words. Would you like me to read the entry from October 15th about finding you with Sierra Dominion surveyors at Devil's Pass, about the payments?
That's enough. William stepped forward, trying to snatch the journal. Sarah stepped back, but her pregnant balance betrayed her. She would have fallen if strong hands hadn't caught her. Samuel stood there, having moved through the crowd like mist. His steady presence caused an immediate uproar. You see, Reverend Crane shouted. "The savage touches her publicly. This proves I don't let pregnant women fall downstairs," Samuel said quietly. His first public words in Prospect Ridge. His English was precise, educated, nothing like the broken speech many expected. Unlike Christian men who push them. "Doctor," Winters cleared his throat nervously. "Perhaps we should continue this inside." "No!" A new voice cut through the tension. Henry Pike pushed through the crowd, Thomas's small hand in his weathered one. Behind them came several miners, their face set with determination. "If you're going to railroad this woman, you'll do it where we can all see." "This isn't your concern, Pike," William warned. "Like hell it isn't." The old miner spat tobacco juice dangerously close to William's polished boots. "James Mackenzie was a good man. Helped my nephew when a shaft collapsed. Paid for the doctor himself. His widow deserves better than your schemes." More voices rose from the crowd, some supporting, others condemning. Sarah noticed Martha Donnelly looking uncertain, whispering to her husband. The neat lines of judgment were blurring. Judge Patterson finally emerged from the courthouse, his judicial robes making him look like a carrion bird. "Order, Mr. Mackenzie. You filed a petition regarding Mrs. Mackenzie's mental capacity." "I did, Your Honor," William replied smoothly. "She's clearly suffering from pregnancy hysteria, taking in Indians, trading away family heirlooms, making wild accusations." "I can speak for myself, Judge." Sarah interjected. "Yes, I traded my wedding ring. For human lives. Yes, I've provided shelter to Mr. Blackwater and his son. As payment for the debt my husband owed this man saved James's life. And yes, I'm making accusations. With proof." She held up the journal again. "My husband documented suspicious activities involving mineral rights, sacred Shoshone lands, and certain prominent citizens. He also mentioned a will filed with attorney Benjamin Hartley in Sacramento. I've sent a wire. Mr. Hartley is en route." William's composure cracked. "That's impossible. James never told you." Sarah smiled coldly. "Perhaps because he suspected you were involved in the mine accidents, the ones that killed 3 men who opposed Sierra Dominion's expansion." The crowd erupted. Judge Patterson banged his gavel uselessly on the courthouse door. Through the chaos, Sarah heard it a single word, high and clear. "Fire." Thomas stood rigid, pointing at Reverend Crane, his small voice cutting through the noise like a blade. "Fireman, fireman, hurt mother." Samuel went absolutely still. Then, moving with dangerous grace, he positioned himself between Thomas and the Reverend. "My son speaks, first words in 3 years. Interesting what makes a silent child find his voice." Reverend Crane backed away. "The boy's confused, traumatized." "Or remembering," Samuel said softly. "The night you came to our village with torches, the night his mother burned." The accusation hung in the air like gunpowder waiting for a spark. Some in the crowd began backing away, sensing violence brewing. Others pressed closer, hungry for drama. "Your Honor," William said desperately, "surely you see this proves my point. Sarah's corrupting influence has these people making insane accusations." A commotion at the crowd's edge interrupted him. Riders were approaching a man in a city suit, accompanied by 2 federal marshals. Attorney Hartley had arrived sooner than expected. "Judge Patterson," the lawyer called out, dismounting with practiced ease. "Benjamin Hartley, attorney at law. I understand there's some question about my client's mental capacity." He looked at Sarah with sharp, intelligent eyes. "Mrs. Mackenzie, I presume your wire was quite urgent." "Thank God," Sarah breathed. Hartley produced a leather portfolio. "I have here the last will and testament of James Mackenzie, properly witnessed and filed. Also, correspondence between William Mackenzie and certain executives of Sierra Dominion regarding the forced acquisition of mineral rights, And most interestingly, a federal investigation notice into the deaths at the Prospect Ridge mine. William's face went gray.
You can't, those are private.
Were private, Hartley corrected. Until James Mackenzie sent copies to the federal prosecutor's office. He was building quite a case before his unfortunate accident. An accident that, according to his notes, he predicted with remarkable accuracy. Judge Patterson looked between William and the federal marshals, calculating rapidly. Perhaps we should adjourn to my chambers.
No,
Sarah's voice rang out.
They wanted this public. Let it stay public. Let the whole town hear how William Mackenzie conspired to steal from his brother's widow. How Reverend Crane used his pulpit to justify murder. How this town's prominent citizens sold their souls to Sierra Dominion. Careful, woman,
William snarled, abandoning pretense.
Accidents happen in mining country, even to pregnant widows.
The threat was too blatant. One of the federal marshals stepped forward. Mr. Mackenzie, I think you should come with us. We have questions about those mine deaths. As William was led away. Still protesting, Reverend Crane tried to slip through the crowd, but Thomas's voice stopped him again. You killed her. You killed my mother. The words were clearer now. Gaining strength. Samuel knelt beside his son, not trying to silence him, but simply being present. The boy continued, words pouring out like water through a broken dam.
Fire everywhere. Mother tried to get the babies out. You hit her. She fell.
The roof came down. Several women in the crowd gasped. Even some of Crane's supporters looked shaken. The Reverend's carefully constructed moral authority crumbled like ash. The boy's lying, Crane said weakly. Taught to lie by his savage father. My son, Samuel said quietly, has not spoken since that night. Not one word, until he saw you standing next to the man who threatens another mother. He looked at Sarah, then back at Crane. Trauma has its own truth, and children remember what adults try to forget. Henry Pike stepped forward with several other miners. Reverend, might be best if you joined Mr. Mackenzie for a talk with these federal boys. Got some questions about them Shoshone villages myself now. As Crane was escorted away, the crowd began dispersing, buzzing with shock and gossip. Sarah felt her knees weakening and gratefully accepted Samuel's steadying arm. Attorney Hartley approached them. Mrs. Mackenzie, we should talk privately about your husband's will. There are provisions, significant ones regarding you, your child, and certain land holdings.
Tomorrow,
Sarah said wearily.
Today, I just want to go home.
As they prepared to leave, Martha Donnelly approached hesitantly. Sarah, I owe you an apology. We all do. If what that boy said is true. It's true, Samuel said flatly. Your Reverend led 12 men to our winter camp, said we were squatting on company land. We weren't, but dead Indians can't argue boundaries. Martha's face crumpled.
Dear God, and we sat in his church, listened to him preach.
She looked at Thomas, who had retreated back into watchful silence.
I'm sorry, child. I'm so very sorry.
The ride back to Boulder Creek was quiet, except for the creak of wagon wheels. Thomas sat between Sarah and Samuel on the bench, occasionally touching one or the other as if assuring himself they were real. His voice had returned, but he used it sparingly, like a newly healed wound careful of strain. As they neared the cabin, Samuel finally spoke. The Reverend will want revenge. William, too, if he avoids prison. This isn't over. I know, Sarah replied.
But at least now we're fighting in the open. No more shadows.
And Raven's Nest, Sarah considered. Still protected for now, but they know something's there. We'll need to be clever. That evening, as Sarah prepared supper with aching feet and back, she found Thomas at her elbow, silently helping. When she smiled at him, he spoke again. Baby's name? Sarah's hand went to her belly.
I don't know yet. What do you think?
Thomas considered gravely. Hope, like morning.
Tears pricked Sarah's eyes. Hope, that's beautiful. Thomas. From across the room, Samuel watched them, his son finding words again. This brave woman who'd risked everything for strangers. The walls he'd built after his wife's death were beginning to crack. That night, for the first time, all three of them sat together by the fire instead of retreating to separate corners. Thomas practiced his rediscovered voice, telling simple stories about rocks and birds. Sarah shared memories of James that made them all laugh. Samuel even offered a tale from his childhood, about learning to read sign in the snow. The candles still burned in the window, but now it felt less like defiance and more like welcome. A small light holding back a vast darkness, gathering strength for the storm still coming. Outside, unseen, riders were already moving through the night. William's arrest had forced certain hands. If the law wouldn't deliver what Sierra Dominion wanted, perhaps hired guns would. But inside the cabin at Boulder Creek, a different kind of power was building, the power of broken people choosing to stand together, of a woman's courage rekindling a warrior's heart, of a child's voice returning to speak truth. The real test was coming, but tonight they were home. The October morning bit sharp as Sarah guided the wagon toward Prospect Ridge. Samuel rode alongside on James's old mare, rifle across his saddle, while Thomas huddled in the back with the precious cargo, James's journal, and documents for Attorney Hartley. They'd debated this trip for days, but the lawyer's telegram had been urgent. Evidence needed immediately. Federal investigation expanding. The town square looked different in autumn light, where the auction platform had stood. Normal commerce continued, farmers selling squash, women comparing fabric. But conversations died as their wagon rolled past. Murderers, someone whispered. Liars, another countered. Sarah kept her eyes forward, but she felt the town's division like a physical weight. William's arrest had split Prospect Ridge down the middle, those who believed the accusations and those who refused to see their leaders as villains. At Hartley's temporary office above the bank, they found chaos. Papers covered every surface, and the lawyer looked like he hadn't slept in days. 2 federal marshals stood guard, hands never far from their weapons. Mrs. Mackenzie, thank God. Hartley barely glanced up. We have a problem. William posted bail. He's out, and our witnesses are disappearing. Sarah's blood chilled. Disappearing. The Garrett family left in the night. The mine foreman who was ready to testify about the cave-in gone. Even Doc Winters packed up. Hartley finally looked at them fully, his eyes lingering on Samuel. Mr. Blackwater, I presume your testimony about the village burning would be invaluable, but an Indian's word against irreverence. Samuel finished quietly. I understand American justice. Unfortunately, yes. Hartley's honesty was brutal. Which is why I need everything James documented. And Mrs. Mackenzie, I need you to publicly read portions of the journal. Today, Judge Patterson has called a town meeting to address the unrest. That's what they're calling it, Sarah asked bitterly. Unrest. William's supporters are mobilizing. Reverend Crane has been released on his own recognizance, apparently. Burning Indian villages isn't considered a serious crime by local authorities. They're claiming you fabricated everything, that James was unstable, that you've been corrupted by... He gestured uncomfortably at Samuel. By my savage influence, Samuel said dryly. Precisely. The town meeting is in 2 hours. If we don't present compelling evidence publicly, the federal investigation could be undermined by local sentiment. Small-town politics trumping federal authority, it happens more than you'd think. Sarah touched her belly, feeling the baby shift restlessly. 7.5 months now, and the strain was showing. What do you need me to do? Stand before your neighbors and call William a murderer. Read your husband's words aloud. Make them see the truth. She'll be a target, Samuel said flatly. You're asking her to paint a mark on her back. I know. Hartley's expression was grim. But without her testimony, William walks free.
Crane continues preaching. Sierra Dominion keeps stealing land, and everyone who died, including your wife, Mr. Blackwater gets no justice. Thomas, who'd been silent, tugged on Sarah's sleeve. Bad men watching, he whispered, pointing at the window. Across the street, 3 rough-looking men lounged against the saloon wall. Their eyes never left Hartley's office. One of them scarred face. Cold eyes touched his gun belt in clear threat. Hired guns, Samuel observed. Not local. Hartley cursed under his breath. This is escalating faster than expected. Mrs. Mackenzie, perhaps you should... I'll speak, Sarah interrupted. But not alone. This isn't just about James anymore. It's about all of it, the stolen land, the burned villages, the dead miners. Everyone deserves their truth told. The town hall was packed by the time they arrived. Sarah recognized every face: neighbors, merchants, people she'd known for years. Some looked at her with sympathy, others with suspicion or outright hostility. William sat in the front row, his expensive suit immaculate, his expression confident. Beside him, Reverend Crane clutched his Bible like a weapon. Judge Patterson called for order. We're here to address the recent disruptions. Accusations have been made, wild accusations that threaten the peace of our Christian community. Wild. Sarah stood, ignoring the judge's surprise. Is it wild to say my husband documented crimes? Is it wild to want justice for murdered men? You're out of order, Mrs. Mackenzie. This whole town is out of order. Sarah's voice carried strength she didn't know she possessed. We've let companies and criminals hide behind respectability. We've let a man use God's name to justify burning children. The crowd stirred uneasily. Reverend Crane rose. This woman consorts with savages. She's been corrupted, led astray. I was led astray. Sarah agreed loudly. By people like you. People who told me Christianity meant keeping quiet, accepting injustice, looking away from suffering. But then I read my husband's words. She opened the journal, her hands steady. October the 15th followed William to Devil's Pass. He met with Sierra Dominion surveyors and Reverend Crane. They discussed the Shoshone winter camp near Ravens Creek. William said the Indians had no legal claim. Crane said God wouldn't protect heathens. They laughed about solving the Indian problem permanently. Gasps and mutters rippled through the crowd. William stood. Those are lies, forgeries. Your brother's handwriting is on file at the bank, Hartley interjected. We can verify every word. Sarah continued reading. November 3rd, the winter camp burns tonight. God forgive me. I cannot stop it. 12 men ride with Crane. William stays behind plausible deniability. He calls it, I've written to Attorney Hartley. If something happens to me, he has copies of everything. Something did happen. Sarah looked directly at William. 2 weeks later, my husband died in a convenient accident. A cave-in where he shouldn't have been. At a time he wasn't scheduled to work. You can't prove, William started. November 10th. Sarah read inexorably. William cornered me today. Said accidents happen to those who interfere. Said Sarah would be taken care of if I kept quiet. I won't keep quiet. Some things matter more than life. The silence was deafening. Then Martha Donnelly stood in the middle of the hall. I believe her. God help me. I sat in that man's church while he had blood on his hands. I believe every word. Others began standing Henry Pike and his miners. Some farmers, even the school teacher. But William's supporters pushed back, shouting about lies and conspiracies. The meeting devolved into chaos. Through the noise, Thomas's voice cut clear. 23 people died. I counted. The hall fell silent, all eyes on the small boy. He stood on a bench, Samuel's protective hand on his shoulder. 12 children, 7 women, 4 old men. The fire was so hot it melted my mother's wedding bracelet to her wrist. I couldn't get it off to keep. His voice was steady, factual, terrible. The Reverend hit her with his rifle when she tried to save the babies.
She fell into the flames. I watched. I remembered. I just couldn't speak it until now.
Several women were crying. Even some of William's supporters looked shaken. A child's testimony carried a weight that no adults could. Judge Patterson cleared his throat repeatedly. Perhaps the federal investigation should be expanded? Marshal, I think you should take Mr. William Mackenzie and Reverend Crane into custody, pending. The window exploded in a shower of glass. Gunfire erupted from outside. The 3 hired guns had made their move, trying to silence witnesses the permanent way. Everyone down, Samuel commanded. Already moving. He pushed Sarah behind an overturned bench as bullets whined overhead. Thomas huddled against them, frighteningly calm for a child under fire. The federal marshals returned fire, but they were pinned. Screams filled the air as townspeople scrambled for cover. In the chaos, Sarah saw William trying to escape through a side door. "No," she muttered, checking James's old Colt. "Not again." She moved before Samuel could stop her, keeping low, using the pandemonium as cover. The side alley was narrow, dark. William was halfway to his horse when her voice stopped him. "Running away, just like the night James died." He spun, his own pistol appearing. "You stupid woman. You could have had everything. I would have taken care of you, the baby." Taken care of like you took care of James." His face twisted. "James was weak, sentimental. He would have ruined everything with his conscience. The land, the gold, it's worth millions, and he wanted to honor treaties with savages." "So you killed him." "I created an opportunity," William corrected coldly. "Just like now." He raised his pistol, but Sarah was already moving. James had taught her to shoot years ago, patient lessons she'd never thought she'd need. The Colt bucked in her hand. William's shot went wide. Hers didn't. He crumpled, clutching his shoulder, gun falling from nerveless fingers. "You shot me," he gasped, disbelieving. "You actually—" "You threatened my child," Sarah said simply. "My husband, my family. What did you expect?" Back in the hall, the gunfire had ceased. The hired guns were down. 1 dead, 2 wounded and captured. The federal marshals had controlled the situation, but barely. Several townspeople were injured, though thankfully none fatally. Sarah found Samuel and Thomas sheltering the wounded, using torn cloth for bandages. Thomas was speaking constantly now, comforting hurt neighbors with a child's earnest sympathy. The boy who'd been silent for 3 years had become the voice of compassion. "You're hurt," Samuel said, noticing blood on Sarah's sleeve. "Glass cut. It's nothing." She was more concerned with the cramping in her belly, stress and exertion taking their toll. "William's alive. Shot him in the shoulder. He confessed to orchestrating James's death." Samuel's expression was unreadable. "You could have killed him." "I'm not him," Sarah replied. "Death would be too easy. I want him to face justice, to sit in a cell knowing everyone knows what he is." Attorney Hartley appeared, disheveled but triumphant. "The marshal heard everything. With the confession and the journal. We have enough. Sierra Dominion's executives are being arrested in Sacramento. The land grab is over." Sarah sank onto a bench, exhaustion hitting like a sledgehammer. Around them, the town was transforming. Neighbors who'd been at each other's throats were helping the wounded. Martha Donnelly was tending one of William's supporters with the same care she showed everyone. Even some of Crane's congregation were removing the Reverend's books from the church, faces grim with betrayed faith. "What happens now?" Sarah asked wearily. "Trials," Hartley said. "Testimony, justice, slow but sure. And Mrs. Mackenzie, your husband's will stands. The properties, the mining shares, it's all yours and your child's. Plus, there's a provision for the Shoshone. James set aside land in trust, legally protected, Raven's Nest and the surrounding valleys." Thomas looked up at his father. "We can go home." Samuel's voice was thick. "Some of us can. Enough to start again." As they prepared to leave,
Half the town seemed to need to speak to Sarah. Apologies, thanks, promises of support. She accepted it all graciously, but her mind was on Boulder Creek, on the quiet cabin where she could rest. The sun was setting as their wagon rolled out of Prospect Ridge. Thomas had fallen asleep against Samuel's shoulder, worn out by the day's revelations. Sarah drove, the reins familiar in her hands. "You changed everything today," Samuel said quietly. "We changed everything," Sarah corrected. "All of us, even William and Crane, in their way. Sometimes it takes great evil to make people confront the smaller evils they've been accepting." They were halfway home when the first real contractions hit. Sarah gasped, hands tightening on the reins. "The baby," Samuel's voice was sharp with concern. "Maybe, probably just, no, definitely." Another contraction rolled through her. "This baby has terrible timing." Samuel took the reins, urging the horses faster. "Hold on, we're almost home." But Sarah knew, with a certainty beyond logic, that home had become more than a place. It was this Samuel's steady presence, Thomas's trusting weight, the child stirring to life within her. It was the choice to stand together against the darkness. The cabin came into view just as her water broke. Soon there would be pain and struggle and new life entering a changed world. But for now, there was just the golden light of sunset, the candle still burning in the window, and the knowledge that justice, imperfect but real, had finally come to Prospect Ridge. The ending that would shake the town had begun. But first, a child would be born into freedom. The sacred valley of Raven's Nest lay hidden beneath morning mist, its beauty so profound that Sarah forgot her exhaustion. After yesterday's contractions had proved false, mere warnings from a baby not quite ready, Samuel had decided she needed to see this place James had died protecting. Ancient pines stood sentinel along the narrow canyon entrance, their roots gripping weathered stone. A creek ran crystal clear through the valley's heart, its banks lined with gold-bearing quartz that caught the early light. But it was the silence that struck Sarah most not empty, but full of presence, as if the mountain itself was listening. "The old ones called it the earth's heartbeat," Samuel said quietly, helping her from the horse. Thomas ran ahead, more animated than she'd ever seen him, gathering colorful stones with reverent care. Sarah understood immediately why men would kill for this place and why it must never be desecrated. The gold here wasn't just ore and rock. It was part of something larger, a balance between earth and sky that even she, practical minister's daughter, could feel in her bones. "Your people's treaty with the mountain," she said. "Tell me." Samuel's eyes swept the canyon walls. "Take only what the water gives freely. Never wound the mountain's heart with deep mining. Share the valley's gifts with all who come in peace. My grandmother's grandmother made this pact. The mountain has kept its side floods never destroy. Game remains plentiful. The water runs pure even in drought. And Raven's Nest." Sarah indicated the massive formation of black rock that gave the valley its name, shaped by wind and time into something almost alive. "The guardian, where the ravens nest, the earth's pulse is strongest. Dig there and—" He shrugged. "Maybe nothing, maybe the mountain's anger. My people never tested it." A raven called from the formation, answered by another. Thomas looked up from his stones. "They're talking about us," he said matter-of-factly. "Saying the baby's coming soon." Sarah laughed, but her hand went instinctively to her belly. The baby had been restless all morning, turning and pressing in ways that made her back ache constantly. They spent the morning exploring carefully, Samuel showing her the traditional gathering spots, the shelter caves, the hot spring hidden behind a fall of vines. This was what William and Crane had tried to steal, not just gold, but a whole world of meaning. "I want to honor James's promise," Sarah said as they rested by the spring. "The trust Hartley mentioned will do it properly. Legal protection for your people to return here." Samuel studied her for a long moment.
You would do this, even knowing the gold could make you wealthy beyond imagining.
I'm already wealthy, Sarah replied, watching Thomas chase butterflies with pure joy. I have family. I have purpose. She gasped as a stronger contraction rolled through her. I have really terrible timing. This wasn't false labor. She could feel the difference. A deep, purposeful tightening that meant business. Samuel's face went carefully controlled. How long? Hours yet. Maybe. First babies are unpredictable. Another contraction made her breathe sharply. But we should go.
They'd prepared for this possibility, bringing supplies in case of emergency. But the cabin was 6 hours away, and the nearest midwife even further. Samuel made quick calculations. There's an old healing woman, Mary Crowfeather, 2 valleys over, my people's way. She helped birth Thomas. Sarah nodded without hesitation. Then we go there. The journey became a blur of controlled urgency. Samuel led them through paths Sarah hadn't known existed. Shortcuts that cut hours from the trip. Thomas rode with her, his small hands steady on the reins when contractions forced her to grip the saddle horn. Story helps, the boy said solemnly. Mama told stories when the pain came. Want to hear about the clever rabbit? Through her labor pains, Sarah marveled at this child's transformation. 3 weeks ago, he'd been silent as stone. Now he chattered like a spring creek, words tumbling over each other in his eagerness to help. Mary Crowfeather's dwelling appeared just as Sarah's strength was failing, a sturdy cabin built into a hillside, smoke rising from a central chimney. The old woman emerged before they'd even called out, as if she'd been expecting them. About time, she said in accented English, her weathered face creasing into a smile. The raven said you'd come today. Her eyes moved between Sarah and Samuel with knowing humor. The warrior brings another warrior woman. Good. This one will need strength. Inside, the cabin smelled of sage and cedar, dried herbs hanging from every beam. Mary's granddaughter, Ruth, a woman near Sarah's age, had already prepared the birthing space clean furs, boiled water, the tools of ancient practice alongside modern necessities. Men out, Mary commanded, but her voice was kind. This is women's work now. Samuel hesitated, something passing between him and Sarah that needed no words. Since the auction, they'd moved from strangers to something harder to define, not quite family, more than friends, bound by shared purpose and growing trust. Sarah reached out, squeezing his hand. We'll be fine. Take care of Thomas. The hours that followed blurred into a rhythm old as humanity itself. Mary and Ruth worked with quiet efficiency, their hands gentle but sure. They didn't offer false comfort or tell Sarah to be quiet. They simply stayed present, matching her strength with their own. Your husband's spirit is near, Mary said during a brief respite between contractions. Not haunting watching. He approves of the warrior, says to stop feeling guilty about living. Sarah might have dismissed it as the old woman's fancy, but something in her words rang true. James would want her to find happiness again, would want their child born into love, not just duty. The sun was setting when transition hit with brutal intensity. Sarah heard herself making sounds she didn't know she could make, primal and powerful. Ruth sang something low and rhythmic in Shoshone, the melody somehow making the pain bearable. Almost, Mary murmured. One more mountain to climb. Through the window, Sarah saw Samuel pacing outside. Thomas perched on a stump, telling him what seemed to be every story he'd stored up during his silent years. The sight gave her the last surge of strength she needed. Hope Mackenzie entered the world with the last light of day, her cry strong and immediate. Mary lifted the baby with reverent hands, checking her with practiced skill before placing her on Sarah's chest. A warrior indeed, the old woman proclaimed. She'll need to be, with the blood she carries. Sarah barely heard, lost in the miracle of tiny fingers, rosebud mouth, the fierce aliveness of her daughter. Hope's eyes opened briefly James's eyes, bright blue and curious. But the shape of her face, the determined set of her jaw even minutes old that was all Sarah. "Healthy?" she managed to ask. "Perfect," Ruth assured her. 10 fingers, 10 toes, and lungs like a mountain cat. After the afterbirth, after the cleaning and wrapping and first nursing, Mary finally allowed the men inside. Thomas approached like Hope was made of spun glass, his eyes huge with wonder. "She's so small?" he whispered. "Was I that small?" "Smaller," Samuel said roughly. Something in his voice made Sarah look up. The warrior's eyes were suspiciously bright as he watched Thomas gently touch Hope's hand. When the baby's fingers curled around the boy's, Thomas let out a delighted laugh. "She likes me, Sarah. She likes me." "Of course she does," Sarah said softly. "You're her big brother now." The words slipped out without thought, but their impact was immediate. Thomas went very still, looking between Sarah and his father. Samuel's expression was unreadable, but his hand found Thomas's shoulder in silent support. "Brothers protect," Thomas said finally, with 6-year-old solemnity. "I'll teach her everything, tracking and stones and which berries are safe and how to whistle like the birds." Mary cackled from her corner. "And so it begins, the new weaving of families." She fixed Samuel with a stern look. "The woman risked everything for you and the boy. You risk everything for her and the child. This is balance." As if in response to her words, Hope began to fuss. Sarah tried to soothe her, but exhaustion was pulling her under. Without being asked, Samuel carefully took the baby, his large hands impossibly gentle. Hope settled immediately, apparently recognizing safety when she felt it. "Rest," he told Sarah. "We'll watch." Sarah wanted to protest, but her body had other ideas. The last thing she saw before sleep claimed her was Samuel sitting by the fire, Hope cradled against his chest, Thomas leaning against his father's side. Mary had called it a new weaving. Looking at them, Sarah saw the pattern emerging, different threads coming together to create something stronger than any could be alone. She woke hours later to find the cabin quiet, except for the fire's whisper. Samuel still sat watch, though Thomas had migrated to a pile of furs near the hearth. Hope slept in a traditional cradleboard Mary had produced, beautiful beadwork catching the firelight. "You should have woken me to feed her," Sarah whispered. "Mary left goat's milk, just in case, but she hasn't needed it. Seems content to sleep." He paused. "Like her mother, she chooses her own time." Sarah studied him in the firelight, this man who'd lost everything, who'd been caged and sold, who still chose to stay when he could have vanished into the mountains. "Thank you, for everything, for staying." "Where else would I go?" The question seemed to surprise him. "Thomas found his voice here, found a sister. I found—" "What did you find?" He was quiet so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, purpose. After Rebecca died, after the village burned, I wanted to follow her into the spirit world. Only Thomas kept me here. But purpose isn't the same as life. These weeks with you watching you fight, seeing your courage, I remembered why fighting matters." Sarah felt tears prick her eyes. "James saw that in you. The fighter. That's why he trusted you with his secrets. He trusted me with more than that." Samuel's voice dropped lower. "That last week, he asked me to look after you if something happened. Said you were stronger than you knew. But strength shouldn't mean being alone." The revelation hung between them, fragile as spun glass. Sarah thought of all the small kindnesses, the load of wood appearing each morning, the repairs completed without asking, the quiet presence that never demanded but always supported. "Is that why you stayed duty to a dead friend?" At first, his honesty was brutal as always. But duty became something else, became watching you stand against the whole town, became Thomas laughing again, became knowing that leaving would tear something that's trying to heal. Hope stirred, making the small sounds that preceded real hunger. Sarah reached for her, and Samuel transferred the baby with practiced ease. As Hope nursed, Sarah made her own confession.
I traded the ring to save you, but also to save myself. I was drowning in that town, in their expectations, in grief. You and Thomas gave me reason to fight instead of just survive. And now, Sarah looked at her daughter, at the boy sleeping peaceful by the fire, at the man who'd become their protector. Now I want to live, really live, build something new on the ashes of what was. A comfortable silence settled between them, broken only by Hope's contented sounds and the fire's crackle. Outside, snow had begun to fall early for October, but the mountain kept its own calendar. Tomorrow would bring challenges. William's trial loomed. The legal work of protecting Raven's Nest needed doing. The town would have to be faced again. Their judgment weathered. But tonight, in Mary Crow Feather's healing house, a new family was taking root. The ravens were right. Thomas mumbled sleepily from his furs. "Told you the baby was coming." Samuel chuckled, a rare sound that transformed his face. "Sleep, little prophet. Tomorrow you can tell the ravens they have a new person to watch over." As if in agreement, Hope released her mother's breast with a satisfied sigh, milk drunk and content. Sarah traced her daughter's features with wondering fingers. This child would grow up different bridging worlds, carrying multiple legacies, protected by unlikely guardians. The candle in the window had become a constellation of oil lamps, Mary's tradition of welcoming spirits. But the real light, Sarah thought, came from within, from choosing connection over isolation, trust over fear, love over mere survival. The storm that had shaken Prospect Ridge was far from over, but here in the eye of it, peace held sway. And sometimes, peace was its own form of revolution. The war party moved through the snow like wolves, silent, deadly, inevitable. Josiah Crane led 18 hired guns toward Raven's Nest, their greed sharpened by desperation. With William's arrest and federal investigators closing in, this was their last chance to claim the valley's gold before the law made it impossible. From his position on the ridge, Samuel watched their approach through the pre-dawn darkness. Beside him, 3 Shoshone warriors who'd answered Mary Crow Feather's call waited with drawn bows. Below in the valley, Sarah and the children sheltered in the ancient cave system. Hope barely 2 weeks old, still fragile as frost. "They're early," Samuel murmured to Robert standing bare beside him. "Desperate men keep no schedule," Robert replied. His scarred hands, survivor's hands from the village burning, steadied an arrow. "But the mountain is ready." The preparations had been swift but thorough. When word came through Henry Pike that Crane had gathered men for a final assault, the scattered Shoshone had responded. Not many years of persecution had taken their toll, but enough. The valley's natural defenses had been enhanced with deadfalls, false trails, and strategic obstacles. Not to kill, if possible, but to stop. Samuel's greatest fear had been leaving Sarah vulnerable at the cabin, but she'd made the choice herself. If they're attacking Raven's Nest, that's where we make our stand. Together. Now, watching Crane's men spread out below, Samuel wondered if he'd made the right choice allowing her to come. But Sarah had proved time and again that her courage ran deeper than his protectiveness. A rifle shot cracked the morning silence. One of Crane's scouts had triggered a warning trap. The battle for Raven's Nest had begun. "Remember," Samuel called to his people, "we defend, not slaughter. The federal marshals are coming. We just need to hold." The first wave came up the main trail, exactly as expected. The deadfall caught them perfectly, logs and stones cascading down, blocking retreat without causing fatal harm. Men shouted, horses screamed, chaos erupted. But Crane had planned too. A second group emerged from the forest. Having circled wide, Samuel's heart sank as he recognized the scarred leader, Jake Morrison, the same gunman who'd fired into the courthouse. Somehow he'd escaped custody. "Fall back to the second position," Samuel ordered. They melted into the forest, using knowledge of terrain against superior numbers. Arrows whispered from unexpected angles. Rope traps sent riders tumbling. The snow itself became a weapon, concealing pits and obstacles. In the cave, Sarah held Hope close, singing softly to keep her calm. Thomas stood guard at the entrance with the fierce determination of a boy protecting his family. The Colt was heavy in Sarah's hand. 5 shots between them and whatever came through that opening. "Story," Thomas whispered, his own fear showing. Sarah managed a smile. "How about the one where the clever mother fox protects her kits from the foolish wolves?" Outside, the battle's tide was turning. Crane's men had found the high trail, the one Samuel had hoped they'd miss. From there, they could rain fire down on the defenders' positions. "The cave," Robert said urgently. "They're heading for the cave." Samuel's blood ran cold. He'd left 2 men guarding that approach, but against 6, maybe 8 attackers, without thought, he was moving, abandoning cover to race across open ground. A bullet took him in the shoulder, spinning him down. He rolled, came up running, blood streaming. Another shot gouged the rock beside his head. But the cave was ahead, and he could hear voices, Crane's voice, triumphant and terrible. "Bring them out, the woman and the brats. They're our passage out of here." Samuel burst around the final bend to find a nightmare scene. The 2 guards were down. Morrison held Thomas by the collar, the boy struggling wildly, and Crane himself stood at the cave mouth, pistol aimed into the darkness where Sarah sheltered. "Come out, Mrs. Mackenzie," the Reverend called, "or I'll have Morrison demonstrate what happens to Indian boys who resist God's will."
"Let him go."
Sarah emerged slowly, hope bound against her chest in a carrier. The Colt was steady in her hand, aimed at Crane's heart.
"This is between us. Leave the children out of it."
Crane laughed an ugly sound. "Everything I've lost is because of you and your self-righteousness. My church, my position, my calling." "Your calling was never from God," Sarah interrupted. "God doesn't call men to burn children. Savages aren't children." Spittle flew from Crane's lips. "They're animals, meant to be cleared like any other wilderness creature, and you've polluted yourself with them. Corrupted that baby." The shot was impossibly loud in the narrow space. But it wasn't Sarah who'd fired. Thomas, small and overlooked, had grabbed a hidden knife from his boot, one of Samuel's lessons, and driven it into Morrison's thigh. The man's grip loosened just enough. Thomas twisted free as Morrison's wild shot went high. In that instant of chaos, several things happened at once. Sarah's Colt spoke, catching Crane in the gun arm. Samuel, despite his wound, tackled Morrison from behind. And from the valley entrance came a sound that chilled every combatant, the thunder of many horses, the shouts of federal marshals, and Henry Pike's distinctive roar, "Nobody move, cavalry's here, you bastards!" The fight went out of Crane's men like air from a punctured bladder. Faced with actual authority, their bravado crumbled. Weapons clattered down. Men raised hands. The Reverend himself collapsed, clutching his shattered arm, his face gray with shock and pain. "Thought you might need help," Henry said, riding up with a marshal's star hastily pinned to his coat. "Hartley figured Crane might try something stupid. Made me and 20 other townsmen temporary deputies." Behind him rode half of Prospect Ridge Martha Donnelly with medical supplies. Miners ready to fight for justice. Even some former congregation members who'd finally seen Crane's evil clearly. "You're late," Samuel managed, swaying on his feet. "You're shot," Henry countered. "Martha got a patient for you." The aftermath was swift and decisive. Crane's hired guns, caught red-handed attacking what was now legally protected land, faced federal charges. The Reverend himself, wounded and defeated, was taken into custody with no hope of sympathetic local jury this time. But it was the town's response that truly marked change. As Sarah emerged from the cave, Hope crying but unharmed, the assembled citizens didn't whisper or judge. They cheered. Martha Donnelly pushed through to check the baby, tears streaming down her face. "We should have come sooner," she said. "Should have stood with you from the start. Can you forgive us?" Sarah looked at the crowd people who'd gossiped,
who'd stood silent, who'd let prejudice blind them, but they were here now, when it mattered. And perhaps that's all anyone could ask, not perfection, but the willingness to change.
There's nothing to forgive,
she said quietly. We all find courage at our own pace. The journey back to Prospect Ridge was a procession of the wounded and weary, but also the victorious. Samuel rode despite his injury. Thomas tucked against him, the boy chattering nonstop about his part in the battle. Sarah followed with hope, surrounded by protective townswomen who seemed determined to make up for past failures. At Mary Crow Feather's insistence, they stopped at her healing house. While she tended Samuel's shoulder, through and through, you'll live. Attorney Hartley arrived with documents that made everything official. The federal protection for Raven's Nest is ironclad, he announced. The Shoshone Treaty is recognized and expanded. Any profits from limited, sustainable harvest go into a trust for the tribe and for maintaining the land. Mrs. Mackenzie, as executor, you'll oversee it all. Not just me, Sarah said firmly. She looked at Samuel. Decision crystallizing. Equal partners. The joining of our families should be reflected in law as well as practice. Hartley's eyebrows rose. That's unconventional, but possible, though it would be simpler if... He trailed off diplomatically. Mary cackled from her herb sorting. Lawyer wants to know if you're marrying. Save him the paperwork. The healing house went silent. Thomas looked between the adults with bright interest. Even baby Hope seemed to pause in her fussing. Samuel spoke first, his voice careful. Sarah Mackenzie has given enough, sacrificed enough. I won't have her bound by obligation or gratitude. And I won't have you bound by duty to a dead friend. Sarah replied, But what if we chose each other not from obligation, but from knowing we're stronger together, from wanting to raise these children in a home built on choice, not circumstance. The townspeople just risked their lives for us. I think we've moved past caring about gossip. Sarah's voice grew stronger. I love James. Part of me always will. But that part can exist alongside something new, something unexpected but real. Samuel's hand found hers, careful of her still healing body. Among my people, marriage is a practical thing. Two people choosing to face the world together, to share burdens and joys. No grand ceremonies, just commitment. Sounds perfect, Sarah whispered. Thomas whooped loud enough to make Hope start crying again. Does this mean we're really family now? Real true family? We were always family, Samuel told his son. This just makes it official for people who need papers to understand things. Mary produced a traditional blanket, worn soft with age. Then we do this properly, both ways. She wrapped it around Sarah and Samuel's shoulders as they stood together. By the old way, you pledge to walk the same path. By the new way? She looked at Hartley expectantly. The lawyer, grinning now, produced papers from his case. By the new way. I happen to have marriage certificates. Never travel without them in mining country, too many deathbed ceremonies. His smile faded. Though this is far happier circumstances. It was perhaps the strangest wedding in California history. A Shoshone medicine woman presiding, a federal lawyer witnessing, a cave for a chapel, and a congregation of miners, townswomen, and tribal warriors. Thomas insisted on holding Hope during the brief ceremony, declaring himself the official brother in charge of not dropping the baby. When Samuel kissed Sarah gentle, mindful of watching eyes and cultural differences, the cheers echoed off the valley walls. Ravens rose from their roost in a black cloud, circling 3 times before settling again. The mountain approves, Mary declared. Now someone eats something before that baby decides she's hungry again. The celebration was modest but heartfelt. Stories were shared. Grudges buried, plans made. The wounded healed. The weary rested. And for a few hours, Raven's Nest knew peace. But it was the quiet moment later, as they prepared to return to Boulder Creek, that meant the most. Samuel helped Sarah mount, then lifted Thomas behind her, hope secure in her carrier. His hand lingered on hers. "No regrets?" he asked softly. Sarah looked at her strange, beautiful family. Her husband who'd survived hell and chosen gentleness. Her son who'd found his voice in defending others. Her daughter who'd entered the world surrounded by protectors.
"Only that James couldn't see this," she said honestly. "He'd be happy, I think, knowing we're caring for each other in the land he loved."
"He knows," Samuel said with quiet certainty. "The dead don't leave while love remains." The procession that returned to Prospect Ridge was different from the one that had left. A family had been forged in fire. A town had found its conscience. A sacred place had been preserved for future generations. As they passed through the town square where it all began, Sarah noticed workmen dismantling the auction platform. The cage was already gone, sold for scrap. In its place, someone had begun planting a garden. "Things change," Martha Donnelly said, riding alongside. "Sometimes it takes shock to wake people up, but they do wake up." Sarah nodded. Too tired for long conversations, but grateful for the gesture. They'd won this battle, but the war for justice, for acceptance, for building a world where children like Hope could grow up belonging everywhere that war continued. But tonight, she'd take her family home, light the candle in the window, rest in the arms of a good man who'd chosen hope over bitterness, listen to her son tell wild stories to his baby sister, and trust that tomorrow, whatever it brought, they'd face it together. The ending that shook the town was still coming, but first, there was healing to do, and a life to build from the ashes of all that had burned. The federal courthouse in Sacramento stood like a monument to justice, delayed but not denied. Sarah adjusted Hope in her arms, the 3-month-old baby peaceful despite the crowd gathered outside. Beside her, Samuel stood tall despite his healing shoulder. Thomas clutched his hand, eyes wide at the city's grandeur. "Ready?" Attorney Hartley asked, his usually confident demeanor showing cracks of nervousness. This case would set precedents: a mining company on trial, a reverend facing charges of murder, a woman's testimony carrying the weight of revolution. "We've been ready since the day James died," Sarah replied. Inside, the courtroom was packed. Journalists from San Francisco, mining executives in expensive suits, townspeople from Prospect Ridge who'd traveled days to witness. William Mackenzie sat at the defendant's table, his arm still weak from Sarah's bullet. Beside him, Josiah Crane looked like a scarecrow prison had stripped away his righteous facade, leaving only a bitter old man. Judge Frederick Hawthorne, brought in from Washington to ensure impartiality, called for order. This federal court is now in session. The charges are numerous and grave: conspiracy to commit murder, theft of tribal lands, falsification of mining claims, and in the case of Reverend Crane, the murder of 13 Shoshone people, including women and children. The prosecutor, a sharp young man named David Chen, one of the few Chinese lawyers in California, rose. "Your Honor, we'll prove that greed and prejudice led these men to commit acts that shame our nation. Their own words will condemn them." The first day was documents James's journal, authenticated by 3 handwriting experts. Sarah watched William's face as his brother's words exposed every scheme, every threat, every casual discussion of murder like it was simple business. But it was the second day that brought the courtroom to tears, one by one. Survivors testified. Robert Standing Bear spoke of the night his village burned. Mary Crowfeather, dignified in traditional dress, listed the names of the dead, each one a person, not a statistic. Then came Thomas's turn. Sarah had worried about putting him through this, but the boy had insisted. "They need to know. Everyone needs to know." He sat in the witness chair, feet not quite touching the floor, and spoke in a clear, young voice about the night his mother died. No dramatics, no tears, just a child's matter-of-fact recounting of horror that left hardened journalists wiping their eyes. "The Reverend hit Mama with his rifle. She was trying to save the babies. She fell into the fire.
I wanted to help, but Father held me back. He said if we died too, no one would remember.
Do you see the man who hurt your mother in this room? Chen asked gently. Thomas pointed at Crane without hesitation. He's older now, but his eyes are the same, cold. The defense tried to discredit him, a child's memory. Trauma's confusion, but Thomas remained steady. When Crane's lawyer suggested his father had coached him, Thomas's response silenced the room. Father never talked about it, not once. He couldn't. I remembered all by myself, every night for 3 years. I just couldn't speak it until I felt safe. Sarah testified next, reading passages from James's journal, recounting the auction, the threats, the attempt on their lives at Raven's Nest. She spoke of William's confession in the alley, his casual admission of fratricide. "Objection!" William's lawyer shouted. "Hearsay!" I have 3 witnesses who heard the gunshots and saw Mrs. Blackwater holding the defendant at gunpoint. Chen responded smoothly, including Marshall Henderson, who took his confession. Sarah felt William's hatred like a physical force, but she didn't flinch. Hope gurgled in Martha Donnelly's arms in the front row, a reminder of what this fight was for. The evidence mounted relentlessly. Financial records showing payments from Sierra Dominion to Crane's church. Surveys of Shoshone land dated before the removal. Written orders in William's hand instructing foremen to arrange accidents for uncooperative miners. But the moment that truly shook the courtroom came when Chen introduced a surprise witness, Clarence Mitchell, former secretary to Sierra Dominion's board. "I kept copies," the nervous man said, producing a leather portfolio. "Of everything. I knew someday." He pulled out a document that made the gallery gasp. "This is the original treaty between the Shoshone Nation and the territorial government, legal and binding. Everything the company claimed about abandoned land was lies." The defense's case crumbled like sand. Their witnesses contradicted each other. Their justifications rang hollow against the weight of evidence. When Crane took the stand in his own defense, his rant about God's mandate to civilize savage lands only damned him further. The jury deliberated for less than 2 hours. Guilty, guilty, guilty. The word rang out like bells as each charge was affirmed. William Mackenzie conspiracy, attempted murder, fraud. Josiah Crane murder, conspiracy, incitement to violence. Sierra Dominion's executives theft, fraud, conspiracy. But justice wasn't done with pronouncement. As Judge Hawthorne prepared for sentencing, Chen rose once more. "Your Honor, there's the matter of restitution, the stolen lands, the mineral rights. The lives destroyed. Justice demands more than imprisonment." What followed was unprecedented. Sierra Dominion's claims to the disputed territories were void. All lands would revert to the Shoshone people, with federal protection ensuring no future theft. A trust was established for survivors and descendants, funded by the company's seized assets. William's share of the Mackenzie holdings was stripped, transferred to Sarah and Hope as rightful heirs. As for sentencing, Judge Hawthorne's voice was grave. "William Mackenzie, for your crimes, including the implied murder of your own brother, 25 years hard labor. Josiah Crane, for the murder of innocents while claiming God's name, you will hang." The courtroom erupted. Crane screamed about divine vengeance until marshals dragged him away. William sat stone-faced, his empire of greed reduced to a cell and chains. Outside, Prospect Ridge's citizens waited. When Sarah emerged carrying Hope, with Samuel and Thomas beside her, the cheers were deafening. But it was the Shoshone people's response that moved her most silent nods of acknowledgement, hands raised in blessing, recognition that some wrongs had been addressed, even if they could never be fully healed. That evening, in their hotel room overlooking the Sacramento River, the new family finally had privacy to process what had happened. Thomas was subdued, the weight of testimony settling on his young shoulders. "Did I do right?" he asked. "Telling about Mama?" Samuel pulled his son close. "You honored her memory. spoke truth when it was hard. That's the bravest thing anyone can do. And now, Sarah asked quietly, hope sleeping against her chest.
We won, but what does that mean for us?
Samuel was quiet, watching the river flow. It means we can build without looking over our shoulders. It means the children grow up in a world slightly more just than yesterday. It means... He turned to her, and she saw vulnerability in his warrior's face. It means I need to learn how to live in peace, how to be a husband in daylight, not just crisis. Sarah reached for his hand.
We'll learn together, all of us.
A knock interrupted Attorney Hartley with final papers. The trust documents for Raven's Nest. You'll both need to sign as co-executors. And Mrs. Blackwater. There's substantial compensation from James's mining shares and the restitution fund. You're quite wealthy now. Sarah looked at the numbers without really seeing them. What good is wealth without family to share it? She made a sudden decision. Mr. Hartley, I want to establish a school in Prospect Ridge for all children, white, Shoshone, Mexican, Chinese, everyone, with teachers who speak multiple languages, who honor all traditions. Hartley blinked. That's ambitious and controversial. Everything worth doing is. Sarah replied, Thomas, what do you think? Want to help me plan a school? The boy's face lit up. Can we teach about the real history, about what really happened? That's exactly what we'll teach. They spent the next days in a whirlwind of legal arrangements. The Shoshone survivors gathered to plan their return to ancestral lands. Some, like Robert Standing Bear, chose to remain near Prospect Ridge, building bridges between communities. Others headed for the protected valleys, ready to heal in traditional ways. Mary Crow Feather presided over a ceremony at the river, not quite traditional, not quite Christian, but something new. She blessed the water that would flow back to their mountains, carrying news of justice achieved. The wheel turns, she said, pouring sacred herbs into the current. What was stolen returns. What was broken begins to mend, but remember, vigilance is the price of keeping what we've won. The journey home took longer. Their party swelled with returning Shoshone families. At each stop, people emerged to stare at the Indian families traveling openly, at the mixed couple with their children, at the visible changing of an era. Some faces showed hostility, others curiosity, many confusion. Change was never comfortable, and California in 1877 wasn't ready for the future Sarah and Samuel represented. But ready or not, that future was coming. Near Prospect Ridge, a delegation waited Martha Donnelly, Henry Pike, even some former members of Crane's congregation. Their faces showed shame, but also determination.
We've torn down the old church, Martha announced. Folks didn't want to worship where hate was preached. We're building new a meeting house for all faiths.
Or no faith, just for gathering as neighbors. Sheriff Durant, badge polished but eyes humble, cleared his throat. I've resigned. Town needs law that serves everyone, not just the powerful, hoping the federal marshal will recommend someone better. What about you, Pike? Samuel asked the old miner. Henry grinned. Helping organize the mining co-op. Fair wages, safe conditions, respect for land limits. Amazing what men will agree to when the alternative is federal prison. As they entered Prospect Ridge, Sarah saw the changes everywhere. The auction platform was now a garden. Winter vegetables growing where chains once held human beings. The saloon had a new sign, all colors welcome. Children of various backgrounds played together in the street, their parents watching with cautious hope. It wasn't perfect. Some businesses stayed shuttered to Shoshone customers. Some citizens moved away rather than accept change. The wounds of generations wouldn't heal overnight. But at the cabin on Boulder Creek, with candles glowing in every window, Sarah felt the shift in the world's weight. Hope laughed as Thomas made shadow puppets on the wall. Samuel worked on expanding the cabin. They'd need more room for the children, both present and future. No regrets? Sarah asked, echoing his question from their wedding day. Samuel set down his tools.
crossed to where she sat nursing Hope. His hand was gentle on her hair. How can I regret the path that brought me here to you? To this? Outside, snow began to fall gentle this time, blessing rather than threat. The ravens of Raven's Nest had followed them home, perching in the tall pines, standing sentinel. Thomas abandoned his shadow play to press against the window. Look, the whole world's turning white and new. Yes, Sarah said softly, thinking of all they'd endured, all they'd won, all that lay ahead. Everything's new now. Everything's possible. The ending that shook Prospect Ridge had arrived not with violence, but with verdict. Not with destruction, but with the harder work of building. The old ways of prejudice, greed, and silence had been judged and found wanting. In their place rose something fragile, but real, a family forged from loss. A community stumbling toward justice. A future where children like Hope and Thomas might truly belong everywhere. The revolution was far from complete. But tonight, in a cabin filled with light and laughter, it was enough. They were together. They were free. And tomorrow, they would continue the work of turning a shaken town into a place of hope. Spring arrived in Prospect Ridge with a flourish of wildflowers and hope. The town square, once home to the shameful auction platform, now bloomed with Sarah's community garden. Children of all backgrounds tended vegetables together while their parents watched from benches that bore a simple inscription, "Where all are welcome, all can grow." The schoolhouse stood complete, its bell tower visible from every corner of town. Sarah watched from the doorway as Thomas helped younger children with their letters. At 8, he'd become the unofficial translator, moving easily between English, Shoshone, Spanish, and even some Chinese picked up from the Chen family who'd opened a restaurant. Mama Sarah, little Rosa Martinez, tugged at her skirt. Look, I wrote my name in 2 languages. Sarah knelt awkwardly. Hope, now walking at 14 months, had made her pregnant again. That's wonderful. Rosa, your parents will be so proud. The school had become more than education. It was the heart of the new Prospect Ridge. Parents who'd once crossed streets to avoid each other now sat side by side at school meetings. Children went home teaching tolerance to families who'd never considered it. The federal inspection is today, Samuel reminded her, appearing with Hope on his shoulders. Their daughter babbled happily, pointing at birds with chubby fingers. Hartley says if we pass, we'll get funding for 3 more teachers. We'll pass, Sarah said confidently. The school's success had drawn national attention. Journalists called it the experiment in the mountains, watching to see if children could learn together what their parents had failed to practice. The morning proceeded smoothly until Marshal Henderson arrived with urgent news. William Mackenzie escaped during a prison transfer. 3 guards dead. He's likely heading this way. Sarah's hand went protectively to her belly. Beside her, Samuel's face hardened into the warrior mask she hadn't seen in months. How long? Samuel asked. 2 days head start. I've got men watching the roads, but... Henderson shrugged helplessly. He knows these mountains. That evening, as families gathered for the school's spring festival, tension crackled beneath the celebration. Parents kept children close. Men wore guns who hadn't touched them in months. The fragile peace they'd built seemed suddenly gossamer thin. We're not running, Sarah declared when Samuel suggested sending her and the children to Sacramento. This is our home, our stand. If William wants to destroy what we've built, he'll face all of us. The attack came at dawn 3 days later, not the violent assault they'd expected, but something worse. William had spent his time in prison well, studying law, nursing grievance into something cold and calculated. He arrived with a lawyer and federal documents. I'm challenging the competency hearing, he announced in the packed courthouse. My conviction was based on the testimony of a hysteric woman and a savage child. I demand a retrial. Judge Patterson, older and wearier, examined the papers. These seem to be in order. Mr. Mackenzie has the right to... Your Honor. A clear voice rang from the gallery. Attorney Chen stood, but it wasn't him who'd spoken. Thomas Blackwater, now 8 years old, stepped forward. I'd like to speak, not as a witness, but as a citizen of Prospect Ridge. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. William sneered. The half-breed boy thinks he... I'm not half anything. Thomas interrupted calmly. I'm fully myself. Fully my mother's son who died for protecting babies. Fully my father's son who chose building over revenge. Fully my Mama Sarah's son who taught me that courage means standing up when you're scared. He turned to face the packed courtroom, his young voice carrying surprising authority. 3 years ago, I was silent because I'd seen what hatred does. Today I speak because I've learned what love can build. Look around this room, former enemies sitting as neighbors. Children learning together what their parents feared to imagine. This is what Mr. Mackenzie wants to destroy, not because it wronged him, but because it proves him wrong.
Silence that boy,
William snarled, but no one moved. Thomas continued. You want a retrial, fine. But this time, you won't face a traumatized child. You'll face all of us, every family made whole, every business thriving with fairness, every child who can read in 4 languages because our school teaches that different doesn't mean dangerous. Martha Donnelly stood. The boy speaks for me. Henry Pike rose, and me. One by one, the entire courtroom stood white and Shoshone, Mexican and Chinese, former enemies united. Even Judge Patterson rose from his bench. Mr. Mackenzie, the judge said quietly. You have the right to a retrial, but looking at this room, I wonder if you understand what you're truly facing. This isn't the town you left. These aren't the people you manipulated. File your papers if you must, but know that justice here is no longer for sale. William's carefully constructed composure cracked.
You fools, you've let them corrupt everything. The natural order.
The natural order, Sarah interrupted, standing despite Samuel's protective hand. Is children laughing together, families sharing harvests, communities facing storms as one. You're right that we've changed the order, your order of fear and greed and separation, and we're not going back. What happened next stunned everyone. William pulled a hidden derringer, aiming at Sarah's swollen belly, one shot to destroy the future she carried. Time slowed to honey. But Thomas was already moving, that same knife from his boot flying true. Not to kill Samuel's lessons held even in crisis, but to disarm. The blade caught William's wrist, sending the derringer spinning. In the chaos that followed Marshall's tackling William, the courtroom erupting, something extraordinary occurred. Hope, who'd been silent in Mary Crowfeather's arms, spoke her first words, "Bad man, go away." Bad. Laughter broke the tension. Even William, bleeding and beaten, seemed to recognize the absurdity brought low by children he'd dismissed as worthless, defeated by the very people he'd sought to destroy. 25 years wasn't enough. Judge Patterson declared once order was restored. William Mackenzie, for attempted murder and escape resulting in deaths. You'll hang tomorrow at dawn. May God have mercy on your soul, for this court has none left to give. That night, the town kept vigil not for William, but for themselves. In the meeting house Martha had helped build, people of all faiths and none gathered. They sang songs in multiple languages, shared food from various traditions, told stories that wove their separate histories into shared future. Sarah stood before them, one hand on her belly, the other holding hope. Tomorrow, a chapter closes. William Mackenzie was the last of the old way, those who believed power came from standing on others' backs. But look what we've built by standing side by side. Dawn came crisp and clear. The hanging proceeded with quiet dignity, justice without celebration. As William's body was cut down, church bells rang, but not in triumph. They rang for the end of an era, for the victims who couldn't see this day, for the future now possible. At the cemetery, they unveiled a new memorial not just for James Mackenzie, but for all who died in the violence of greed, Shoshone names carved alongside miners, dates that told stories of loss and resilience. We remember. Merry crow feather intoned. Scattering sage, not to nurture hatred, but to guard against its return. 3 months later, on a golden autumn day, Sarah gave birth to James Samuel Blackwater, a boy bearing both his father's names, born into a world his namesake had died trying to create. The whole town celebrated, bringing gifts that reflected the new Prospect Ridge Shoshone blankets, Chinese silk, Mexican pottery, American quilts. "He's perfect," Thomas declared, appointed big brother for the second time. "I'll teach him everything languages and tracking and how to throw a knife, but only for protection and—" "Breathe, son." Samuel laughed, ruffling Thomas's hair. "He needs to learn to walk first." Standing in the cabin doorway, Hope on her hip and new son in her arms, Sarah watched the celebration in their yard. Tables groaned with shared food. Children played games that borrowed from every culture. Musicians created harmony from different traditions. "Your husband would be proud," Martha said softly, bringing Sarah a cup of tea. "Both my husbands," Sarah corrected gently. James for dreaming it, Samuel for building it. As sunset painted the mountains gold, Samuel found her on the porch. They sat in comfortable silence, watching their community, for that's what it had become. Not just a town, but a living example that different people could choose to be family. The ending that shook the town, Sarah murmured, remembering those long-ago words. Who knew it would look like this? "Like what?" Samuel asked, settling Hope on his other knee as she demanded attention. "Like ordinary people choosing extraordinary grace. Like children teaching adults how to see past color to character. Like—" She smiled as Thomas organized an impromptu language lesson, teaching the Paiute children English while learning their words in return. Like the future arriving one friendship at a time. That night, every window in Prospect Ridge glowed with candles the tradition Sarah had started, now embraced by all. But the brightest light came from the school, where lanterns burned late as teachers prepared lessons for children who would grow up believing the world had always been this way, open, connected, possible. In the cabin at Boulder Creek, the Blackwater family settled for the night. Thomas told Hope stories about clever rabbits and brave mice until she fell asleep. Baby James nursed contentedly while Sarah and Samuel sat before the fire, planning the next day's work on the expanded school. They were interrupted by a knock, Robert standing there with the news. "Telegram from Washington. They want to study what we've done here. Maybe spread it to other towns." Sarah and Samuel exchanged glances. The revolution they'd started with a wedding ring and desperate courage had grown beyond their wildest hopes. "Tell them to come," Sarah said. "Tell them to see what happens when people choose hope over fear." As Robert left, Samuel pulled his wife close, ready to shake more towns. Sarah laughed, feeling the baby stir against her. "With you always." Outside, the ravens of Raven's Nest called their evening songs. The sacred valley was protected, its gold serving life instead of greed. The town that had hosted humanity's worst had become a beacon of its best. And in a cabin built by love and determination, a family that shouldn't exist by the old rules thrived under the new ones they'd written together. The ending had indeed shaken Prospect Ridge. But from that shaking had come not destruction, but transformation, proof that ordinary people, choosing courage over comfort, could change the world one child, one family, one community at a time. And that, perhaps, was the greatest gold of all. Thank you so much for listening to this story of courage, redemption, and the power of choosing love over fear in the Old West. I'm curious, where are you listening from? Please share in the comments below so we can connect and discuss what this tale of transformation meant to you. If this story touched your heart, please subscribe to Wild West Night. Give it a like, and don't forget to hit that hype button so more people can discover and be inspired by Sarah, Samuel, and young Thomas's incredible journey. Your support helps these important stories of hope reach others who need to hear them. Until our next adventure in the untamed frontier,
Keep choosing courage, partners,